The Falcons think they're smarter than everybody when they drafted Michael Penix. Will they have the last laugh or be the butt of every joke?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free in the App Store or Google Play. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka the Iron that Sharpens the Iron, aka Mr. aka. And I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast that makes it your first listen or first watch of the day. All you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are talking about the thing that everybody else is talking about, and that is, of course, the Michael Penix selection, right? You now had a couple of days to let it marinate. This won't be the last conversation we have about the Michael Penix selection. This is probably is Michael Penix month. May is Michael Penix month, basically, right? And why did they take Michael Penix, right? It basically boils down that basically the 2 years of quarterback purgatory that you could say the Falcons have been in the last 2 years, they were so scared of that they would say never again. And they essentially this offseason over-invested resources, $100 million guaranteed to Kirk Cousins over the next 2 years, $23 million guaranteed and a top 10 pick to Michael Penix over the next 4 years, to make sure that they never go back. And it sounds great in theory, right? But the reality may be a little bit different. But now this decision has put a target on the collective backs of this fan base. More on that later, as well as, more importantly, Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris, because they essentially are declaring we're the smartest guys in the room because we did a thing, taking a quarterback in the top 10 with no intention of him playing for the next 2 years, which has never been done in modern NFL history. That's why on Wednesday I sat here convinced, saying, promise you they're not going to take a quarterback at 8, because literally no one in the history of the sport has done it. And sure, there have been teams that have used top 10 picks on a quarterback that they expected to sit a year. Since 2000, you have Michael Vick with the Falcons, Phillip Rivers with the Chargers, Jamarcus Russell with the Raiders, Jake Locker with the Titans, Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs, and Trey Lance with the 49ers. But in all 6 of those cases, those guys were expected to take over in year 2. Chris Chandler, when the Falcons drafted Michael Vick, had 2 years left on his contract, and they cut him with 1 year remaining after the 2001 season. Drew Brees was entering the final year of his rookie contract in 2004 when they drafted Phillip Rivers. The Raiders had signed Dante Culpepper to a 1-year contract before they drafted Jamarcus Russell. The Titans signed Matt Hasselbeck to a multi-year deal after they drafted Jake Locker, because that was the lockout year where free agency happened after the draft. But he signed the equivalent of a Gardner Minshew deal in today's money, right? That basically had 1 year of guaranteed money. We talked before about how Alex Smith had no more guaranteed money on his contract when the Chiefs traded up for Patrick Mahomes in 2017. And the same was true for Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers. Now, they did wind up re-signing him to a 1-year deal after that 2021 season that Trey Lance sat. But they didn't draft Trey Lance. Trey Lance went into that second season as the starter before he got hurt. Now, Phillip Rivers, of this group of 6 guys, did actually sit for 2 years because Drew Brees, in the final year of his rookie contract in 2004, made the Pro Bowl, led the Chargers to the playoffs, and they said, you know what? Let's franchise tag him and let's run it back one more time. And Drew Brees got hurt that year and then wound up in New Orleans, and you guys know the rest of that history. But none of these teams drafted the guys intending for them to sit for 2 years. But the Falcons intend for Michael Penix to sit for 2 years because they have 75 million reasons why Michael Penix can't play in 2025, because that's how much guaranteed money is left on Kirk Cousins, $100 million after this season. And so in some crazy world where Michael Penix is starting games for the Atlanta Falcons next year in 2025, they'll have a $75 million backup quarterback. That's why this move has gotten so much scrutiny. They're basically saying we're smarter than everybody else that has ever run a team in modern NFL history. And this is why we talk about like consensus draft boards and the wisdom of the crowd, that the reality of the NFL is you're probably not as smart as you think you are. And there's a mountain of evidence that tells us that you're probably not as smart as you think you are. We talked historically how this Falcon team under Terry Fontenot has not strayed from consensus. Well, this year they strayed hard, taking Michael Penix in the top 10 and even trading up for Ruka Roro in the second round. And basically that consensus is, if player A has 80 people that like him and think he's good and 20 people that think he stinks, versus player B when 20 people think he's good and 80 people think he stinks. For the last 3 years, the Falcons have consistently said, we're going to go with player A. And this year, the Falcons are like, nope, we're going with player B. And if that works out for you, you look like a genius. But the odds are not stacked in your favor. And this firmly puts a target on your back. And that's why everybody and their mother is now going to second guess you. Because you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt, because everybody's going to look at that and say, this was a bad idea from the start. And there's no reason, right? There's a reason why no one else has done this, right? Because it's simply a poor or wrong choice. And if you make that poor or wrong choice, instead of people saying like, hey, sometimes you win some, you lose some, you get some things wrong from time to time. No, they're going to sit there and say you're incompetent because you knew the odds were stacked against you and you still chose otherwise, right? That's why the Falcons are going to be more than justified to get all the scrutiny that they have deserved to get the last couple of days and will continue to get over the coming months and or years. But people are going to sit here and say, like, why are the Falcons getting all this heat? Like the Packers just did this with Jordan Love. And it's like, did the Packers just do this with Jordan Love? And certainly should the Jordan Love situation that the Packers just did be something that is worth copying? Because has it really worked out for the Packers? That remains to be seen. And that gets us into the conversation that we're going to have on today's episode as we continue it, talking about opportunity cost. But first, guys, it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball season is in full swing, and FanDuel is the place where you can bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And I'm sure some of you were betting on those NFL draft odds, and whoever last I checked, I wasn't keeping up with the Michael Penix odds, but it was like 50-1 last I saw it. So someone made bank if they bet on Michael Penix. And so, go make bank yourself. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And it is also an exciting time of year because it is playoff time in the NBA, and Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting tickets even easier and faster. Prices on Game Time actually go down the closer you get to tip-off. Unfortunately, there's no playoff basketball in Atlanta, but if you find yourself in a city where there is, Game Time is going to allow you to be spontaneous, whether it's for sports, comedy, concerts, theater near you. You can save up to 60% on last-minute deals. Their all-in pricing means you're not going to get hit by surprise fees at checkout. And, of course, we love the panoramic view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect before you even show up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And talking about Locked On Sports today, the free 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Of course, bringing you that can't miss analysis, opinions, and news from the local experts across all the sports. So check it out on YouTube, streaming 24/7, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So last year, the buzzword for the Falcons post-draft was positional value, and I said, we're not going to talk about it, right? Positional value really becomes a conversation in 2026, 2027, when Bijan's up for a second contract, right? And right now, all I care about is winning games, and, we're going to talk about winning games later in this episode, but, today, the buzzword for the Falcons post-draft is opportunity costs, right? That was the buzzword when the Packers took Jordan Love in the first round back in 2020. And everybody says, oh, it worked out for them. And I go, did it? That remains to be seen. Because I've talked about this before, right? The Packers went 9-8 this past year. They won a playoff game with Jordan Love. And everybody's declaring, oh, it's worked for the Packers. But I sit here and I go, I think we got to see a lot more before we can declare this a win for the Green Bay Packers. Because you may or may not recall in that 2020 draft, the Packers were coming off a 13-3 season in year one of Matt LaFleur's tenure. They lost to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game, and everybody was like, hey, man, you get a little bit more firepower on offense. You get, some improvements to the defense. Maybe you get over that hump and you're winning. You're going to the Super Bowl as opposed to the 49ers. But they chose, no, we're not worried about that. We're more worried about where we're going to be at the quarterback position 3 years from now in life after Aaron Rodgers, rather than trying to maximize this window that we have with Aaron Rodgers for the next, 2 or 3 years. Now, they did wind up making it back to the NFC Championship game in 2020 in Jordan Love's rookie year, where he was holding a clipboard, but they wound up losing a close game to the Bucs. And it led to a lot of people wondering, if that pick had been T. Higgins, right, or something else, maybe that's enough to give you enough juice to win that game and you go back to the Super Bowl. So the Packers cost themselves an opportunity to win a Super Bowl. And they never made it back to the NFC Championship game over the next 2 years. In those last 2 years that Aaron Rodgers was in Green Bay. But hey, they won 9 games this past year. And so they made the right choice, right? I don't know. I don't know if I agree. Now, they win a Super Bowl in the next couple of years with Jordan Love, then I think you can declare they made the right choice. But without that, how do they win? Because even if they're a perennial playoff team with Jordan Love, basically means they just treaded water, because that's what they were when Aaron Rodgers. They were more than a perennial playoff team. They were a Super Bowl contender with Aaron Rodgers. That's a step down. The only way they can say is by saying, oh, we extended our Super Bowl window by getting the quarterback, securing our long-term future at the quarterback. So instead of that 3-year window that we had with Aaron Rodgers from 2020 to 2022, we now extended that to like a 7 or 8 year window of potentially winning a Super Bowl with Jordan Love through 2027 or whatever. That's why I sit here and I say you got to pump the brakes a little bit with talking about, hey, this Jordan Love plan that the Falcons have mentioned multiple times now since drafting Michael Penix as something worth copying. We're putting way too much stock in a 9-8 season, even if the Packers looked really good for those last 9 or 10 games under Jordan Love. And how this applies to the Atlanta Falcons, the opportunity cost is not about winning Super Bowls for them. It's just simply making the playoffs, guys. Falcons were already a Super Bowl contender when they made the choice to go with Jordan Love. They were already at the top of the league. The Falcons are somewhere in the middle of the league, coming off 6 consecutive losing seasons, 5 of which had them only winning 7 games. Did you cost yourself the opportunity to add a player like a pass rusher? We'll talk more about why this pass rush really could use it, that can help you make the playoffs this year or next year, because you were so worried about life after Kirk Cousins. Understandably, but is that the priority right now? So again, we talk about this target being painted on your back, because the only way this works, where we say you didn't blow this opportunity, is you got to win. You got to make the playoffs, right? And you heard Raheem's post-draft comment saying, we don't plan on picking this high again. And that comment 1000% will be thrown back in your face, deservedly, if you don't win this year. If you thought the whole, hey, they passed on Lamar Jackson stuff was annoying this past offseason, oh, get ready, guys, because next offseason it's going to be they passed on Bill Belichick so that they could win 8 games and miss the playoffs. And you guys are going to be sitting here and being like, woe is me. Why does the national media hate us? And it's like, the national media doesn't hate us. They brought this on themselves, guys, this scrutiny. Don't get mad at the national media. Get mad at Terry. Get mad at Raheem, because they put this target on your back that you would now have to sit there and deal with all these people talking trash about your favorite football team for the next 9 months or whatever it is. So how do they get that target off their back? They got to win. And let's talk about if they can win. Let's talk about if this team is set to be a playoff team as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So despite the dark times here for the Atlanta Falcons, you need your friends more now than ever. And Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, such as unique stickers. You can trade with your friend to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go is going to make you feel new and exciting every day with constant changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. There's new time events that help you win big, like massive multipliers from everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so go off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So, how can this all work out in the Falcons' favor? How can it work out where we're sitting here with the last laugh and sitting here saying we were indeed smarter than everybody? Simple. You got to win, right? Their actions have put a target on their back. You know, why are you talking about being a playoff team when you haven't been a playoff team for 6 years? We're not going to pick this high again. Well, I've heard that from 3 different coaches of this Falcons regime, 2 different general managers over the past 6 years, and they were wrong every single time. But as we often say, winning cures all ails in this league. The National Football League stands for not for long because it is a results-based business. What have you done for me lately? No one criticizes you when you win. Right? The Packers just proved this. They went 7-3 down the stretch and finished 9-8. And all of a sudden, no one's questioning the Jordan Love selection anymore, even though they should. This is why skepticism about this Falcon team is warranted. This is why I sat here in the middle of March after the first week of free agency being like, why aren't the Falcons doing more? Why are they being so complacent? And this is why I sit here saying the same words after the draft. Are you going to sign any veterans to upgrade this roster? Because I think this roster needs upgrades. Because we asked the question, are the Falcons a playoff team? Maybe. Depends on a lot of unknown variables, you know? And I think a less complacent team wouldn't be leaving so much up to the unknowns. Right? It's a simple test, right? You look at the upcoming 2024 schedule, which, you know, by many accounts is one of the easiest in the NFL. But you have 3 teams on your schedule that you can say with some degree of confidence are playoff teams. That's Kansas City, that's Dallas, and that's Philadelphia. All 3 teams have top 10 quarterbacks. And we talk all the time about, you know, how do you slow down a team that has that high a caliber of quarterback? Get pressure on them, right? You just asked Matt Ryan, right? You go back to the height of the Falcons, you know, time in Matt Ryan, the prime, the peak, whatever you want to call it. Who are the teams that gave the Falcons the most problem? Who are the teams that slowed down this offense more than anybody? The teams that could get pressure on the quarterback. Now you sit here and say, well, we're good in terms of our pass rush. We had 42 sacks last year. Well, you lost 13 of those because you let Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell walk out the door. And they ain't coming back because you just use 4 draft picks to replace them. And even if you double Grady's production from a year ago, given he missed half the season, right now your roster is at 30.5 sacks. That would rank 30th in the NFL last year. Bottom 3, right? Is a bottom 3 pass rush good enough to beat the Chiefs, to beat the Eagles, to beat the Cowboys, their offensive lines, to slow down those quarterbacks? Maybe. I know those teams are dealing with some turnover, maybe not the Eagles, but the Chiefs and Cowboys, you know, new left tackle for the Cowboys, new right tackle, whatever, new center. So maybe those offensive lines aren't as good as they have been historically, but you need a big jump from Arnold Ebiketie this year. You need Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata at the age of 31 to show that they found a fountain of youth and look more like their 27 and 28-year-old selves. Because if those guys fall off, if Grady or Onyemata get hurt again, or Arnold Ebiketie doesn't live up to those expectations, you're back to Lorenzo Carter and Kentavious Street as your best pass rushers. Is that any different than what the Falcons had in 21 and 22, right? When they had the worst pass rush in the NFL and people were like, oh, Dean Pease is going to fix it. You think Jimmy Lake's going to fix it, right? First time NFL play caller versus a guy that had 30 years of NFL play calling experience like Dean Pease. He couldn't fix it. You think Jimmy Lake's going to fix it? So I sit here and I say, you know, you need to invest more. But I get the Falcons invested a lot in the draft in their defensive front, as they should have, because they have to keep Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata as fresh as possible, because those 2 guys are basically carrying your pass rush this year with a little help from Arnold Ebiketie. So I have a hard time sitting here today saying, yep, You have what it takes to slow down those offenses, those playoff caliber offenses, helmed by Patrick Mahomes, helmed by Jalen Hurts, helmed by Dak Prescott. So I sit here and I go, like, if you're going to beat those teams, those playoff teams, you got to win some shootouts. And I think Kirk definitely levels you up to the point that you can be competitive in some shootouts, right? You look at his head-to-head matchups, and again, QB wins, I know. But, in his one duel with Patrick Mahomes, they lost last year in a one-score game. They also lost a one-score game to Jalen Hurts. He's 0-2 against Jalen Hurts, but it was a close one-score game last year in Minnesota. Now, Kirk all-time is 1-7 against Dak Prescott. But, hey, 4 of those losses were one-score games. So, again, it does seem like Kirk's going to give you a shot to be competitive against those offenses. But so far, the Washington or Minnesota teams that Kirk has helmed haven't been able to get over the hump against those playoff caliber teams. But that's not all on the quarterback. But you do wonder, do the Falcons have the firepower to beat those teams, to win shootouts against Mahomes, against Dak, against Jalen Hurts, with some of the firepower that they have? Right? And so, like, when we're talking about, are you a playoff team? I feel like if you measure them up against other playoff teams, you got to feel like at least that's an even matchup. If not, you're coming out ahead. And I think that remains to be seen with the Falcons, especially with their firepower and offense. But we know Bijan and Pitts and Drake have the potential to be great weapons, but they have to be. There's no margin for error. You need all 3 of those guys, just like we had the conversation last year. If you're going to run your offense through those 3 guys, it's fine, but you need all of those guys to play like top 5 or close to it in terms of production at their respective positions, at running back, at tight end, at wide receiver. They absolutely have the potential, but we just haven't seen it sustained. It remains to be proven whether or not those guys can live up to that potential, right? For a full season, like we need them to. They're young, right? And we talked about the secondary options last year. Same conversation we're going to have with the non-Pitts, non-Bijan, non-Drake London options this year, right? We talked about it with Mac Hollins. Like, I sat here, and this is why we were on the Corey Davis watch and Hunter Renfrow watch and all these things about let's get more weapons, let's get more juice into this offense, because Mac Hollins is fine as a secondary, if he's the 5th or 6th best option for your team behind those big 3, behind Tyler Algier, behind Jonnu Smith, right? Similar to how we talked about with Mohamed Sanu, right? Who every year for Mohamed Sanu, when he was kind of the 4th or 5th option for the Falcons in those years with Julio and Devontae and Tevin Coleman, etc., right? Sanu would step up and deliver, much to my chagrin. No, but for 4 or 5 games a year, Sanu delivered, right? Hollins didn't last year. Can Darnell Mooney deliver? Because he's had 1 season where he delivered in that capacity and 3 seasons where he hasn't. And so will we get year 2 for Darnell Mooney where he delivers in that capacity? And basically what I'm saying is there's a 3 out of 4 chance that the answer is no, he won't. Right? And you ask, is Rondell Mooney your presumptive number 3 wide receiver? Is he capable? He's had 3 of those games, those Mohamed Sanu-esque games that we're talking about in his entire career. That's 1 per season. So is he going to be 4 or 5 times better in this 1 season in Zach Robinson's offense, right? In order to deliver it that way. So I sit here going, guys, before we get to May, saying you could use a lot more firepower in this offense if you're going to win some shootouts against some of these playoff teams, right? Firepower that the Falcons chose not to add in the draft. Again, they chose to invest in that in the defensive front rather than the firepower, which is a choice. Again, not saying it's the wrong choice, but there's a give and a take there, right? But you now have an opportunity to invest that firepower now after the draft. They can certainly use more firepower in terms of their pass rush to get after these top 10 quarterbacks that they're going to face, right? They got Justin Herbert as well on the schedule, right? That you've seen them upgrade their offensive line, the Chargers, that is, even if they don't necessarily have the offensive firepower where you feel like you got to score 30 points in order to win that game. You could also use more secondary help, right? They didn't draft any secondary help, right? Right now, if you're playing the Eagles and the Chiefs, right? Richie Grant's going to be the guy that's got to lock down Travis Kelce and Dallas Goedert. You feel good about that matchup? I don't. As much as I am on Richie Grant Island, like, I don't feel like that's a good matchup for him. He shouldn't be asked to do that, right? Who's going to be covering, the secondary receivers, right? Who's your CB2? Who's going to be covering Marquise Brown? Who's going to be covering Xavier Worthy? Who's going to be covering Devontae Smith and AJ Brown? So I sit here, guys, skepticism should be warranted. right? When Raheem says we're not going to be picking this high again. I'm like, okay, we'll see. I've heard this before. I'm rooting for you, Raheem. I'm rooting for you. There's no doubt about it, guys. I'm rooting for you. But I'm sitting here going like, you can't just simply just say it and it's true. You know? Now, you look at the Falcons. According to FanDuel, they have the 4th best odds to make the playoffs of any team in the league. But I don't think that's because they're the stacked roster. I think that's due to them playing a terrible division, right? I don't think they have the 4th best roster, so to speak, in the NFL. I think they're closer to the 14th best roster in the NFL. But hey, 14th best is a playoff team because there's 14 teams that make the playoffs. But that's a razor thin margin, guys. If anything goes wrong, right? Where are you at? Right? They have no excuses with the Michael Penix selection, right? Injuries, that's not an excuse. Kirk Cousins getting off to a slow start in a brand new offense, that's not an excuse. First-time play callers like Zach Robinson and Jimmy Lake, pulling a Sark and taking a month or two to kind of get into their groove and figure things out, that's not an excuse. So we'll see what happens with the Atlanta Falcons. Now, obviously, again, this is not the end of the conversation, right? We'll be talking more and more about this later in the episode, right? But, we'll see if the Falcons can win the games, that they can look smarter than everybody else, 9 months from now. So no one's sitting here talking about, oh, they should have hired Bill Belichick. Oh, why'd they pass on Lamar Jackson? That will still also be brought up from time to time if Kirk doesn't deliver this year, right? So we'll keep talking about this. Tomorrow we'll probably talk about sort of how this path kind of plays out in their favor, where they do look like the smartest guys in the room. If Penix and the path and the timeline, we'll talk about that, right? One version is like, if you were Hollywood and you were scripting this up, how would you script it up to make these guys look, like, they were the smartest guys. They figured out something like, they're making Moneyball or whatever, the equivalent movie, for them in a couple of years, right? So that will be something that's in store. Potentially tomorrow on the podcast. We'll obviously have more to talk about this draft class. We'll have more to talk about with, what holes the Falcons still need to fill, right? But, it's a lot to go. That's why I sit here and I say, hey guys, I feel bad for our country, but this is tremendous content. We're going to have tremendous content for the next 4 months talking about this. The Falcons, they're never boring. I'll give them that. They're never boring. So we'll get into it, guys, on tomorrow's episode. I hope you tune in to Locked On Sports today so that you can get, your 24/7 coverage of all the sports, not just the Atlanta Falcons. Locked On NFL, of course, is going to have you covered for what's going on with the rest of the league for the rest of the week post-draft. Of course, Locked On NFL Draft, they'll be having their favorites, probably handing out grades with Keith Sanchez and Damian Parson. We'll have some guests on. Locked On NFL Scouting is another place with Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs to get your post-draft fixes. So it's all there for you. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.